Okay, so it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce the keynote speaker tonight. Is Professor Ryszard Kluszczyński. He's a professor of cultural and media studies and head of the Department of Electronic Media and chair of School of Media and Audiovisual Culture in Lodz at Lodz University in Poland. And he's also professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Lodz in Poland. And his presentation called Memory, Monument and mnemo-art, Subversive Art of Commemoration. So, please.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk about certain kind of art which deals with memory. In the same time, I selected the narrower field, which is the way how artists approach the issue of monument, memorial. Because when we talk about memory, the monument becomes quite often the tool of approaching past, future, with the bridge memory can provide. I'm using the term mnemo-art, which is not very common. There are two French artists who are at the same time psychiatrists. They proposed this term just to name the project they made in the context of Venice Biennale in 2008. I thought that this concept might be useful because I want also to talk about how artistic approaching memory is important for the work on identity, in which sense identity of the audience, participants, might be involved in the process of building this kind of artwork related to the issue of memory. So the theme of memory was undoubtedly one of the most important issues of the last decade of the 20th century. Its relevance does not seem to have lessened since. After the linguistic turn, which impacted the 1960s, and the cultural turn, which prevailed in postmodern reflection in the 1980s, the 1990s saw yet this new transformation. Specifically speaking, memory, with its various meanings and configurations, became the primary focus of attention. Individual or collective memory, private and social memory, institutional, cultural and communicational memory, the relations between history and memory, the role of technology and media in exteriorization, archiving and distributing memory, all these themes came to predominate in the humanist and social thought. This led the already existing research into new paths and inspired the development of new research projects. The driving force behind that expansion was undoubtedly a monumental 7-volume work of Pierre Nora titled Realms of Memory, Les Yeux de Mémoire, published in French in 1984-92 and in an abridged the 3-volume English translation in 1996. Together with the works of Reinhard Koselleck, Jan Assmann, Richard Terdiman, James Young and Bernard Stiegler, as well as with the re-editions of earlier publications on the subject, for example by Maurice Halbach, Nora's seminal study opened huge vistas to the discipline, gave a powerful thrust to research and stirred multiple discussions and controversies. In my talk, however, I will focus less on memory as such and more on the mediational function of memory, that is, on how memory is related to experience and how its object, as well on how these relations affect identity formation process. The triangular relationship of experience, memory, and identity formation serves here as a specific pattern, or rather a script, as a structure that both defines the place of each of these three components within a greater order and determines research procedures. The meaningful relations among the elements of the structure can certainly be viewed as an essential trigger of the increasing interest in memory-related themes. For I believe that this emphasis on the vital relevance of research on memory originated from the overall interest in the theme of memory as such. As a result, a field of thought emerged when the notions of representation, trace, and presence are crucial, and their contribution to the formation of experience, memory, and identity is equally critical. In my argument, I locate these themes within the field of artistic practices. The direct impulse to study artworks as monuments that take the form of a specific archive came from my curatorship of Masaki's Fujihata exhibition titled Augmenting the World. Creating the show, I focused on the prevalence of the concept and technology of augmented reality in Fujihata's current work and in his earlier pieces from the turn of the millennium. One of the key exhibits on display was Voices of Aliveness. The project, which was shown in a few versions using different media as the interface, and thus offering each time a different experience of the work, is referred to by Fujihata himself as a meta-monument of collective memory. This meta-monument is in the same time a collection of screams, an archive of voices, and a unique vocal database. This is a meta-monument and an archive in one. Discussing his work, Fujihata depicted it as a symbolic image which functions both as a site and as a means of generating memory. But, as he stressed, it was not a conventional memorial preserving collective memory, a physical monument, a sculpture, building, bridge. The project is supposed to generate memory and transform it into a new kind of monument, memory as monument. For all the originality of Fujihata project, however, it turns out that the concept of an artwork as a structure of memory pairing the monument and the archive is not a distinct invention of Masaki Fujihata's alone. So I will discuss on three respective projects of Sania Ivekovic, Krzysztof Wodiczko, and Masaki Fujihata, which tackle in the different ways the theme of memory and its relationships with the past and the future. In doing so, I produce different concepts of the monument. They produce different concepts of the monument, its function and actions that can revolve around them. All these works offer each an unconventional idea of the monument, where the monument is not so much a tool of commemorative representation as rather a means of transforming a representation into presence, which in turn is supposed to trigger a transformation of identity. In their unique ways, the artworks combine the notions of monuments and archive, making this hybrid ensemble into an instrument of social action. The effectiveness of this action will be tackled toward the end of my talk. Rather than chronologically, I will address these projects in a sequence suggested by the concepts they develop. So I want to start with Sanja Iveković Living Memorial. Sanja Iveković project, Rohrbach Living Memorial, developed in 2005 based on a photo showing a group of Roma prisoners waiting to be distributed across the concentration camp they have just been brought to. The photo is a conceptual axis of the artwork that, in the first stage, which interests me most, is a specific performance, an event orchestrated by the artist to launch the process of acquiring and reprocessing knowledge into a symbolic experience of presence. Sanja Iveković invited people from Rohrbach to take part in this event. She wanted them to take the position of Roma from the photo and, in this way, to enact a performance where they would reproduce the past event by symbolically embodying the fate of victims and experiencing the moment long ago preceding their death. The performance was meant to be a living monument the Rohrbach residents could erect for the Holocaust victims. And it also gave them an opportunity to face up to the trauma which they had avoided working through before. As Maria Chlabajova wrote in the catalogue accompanying Sanja Iveković exhibition Argent Matters in the Netherlands in 2009, I quote, in the country that has only recently begun to actively deal with the complicated issues of its not-so-distant history, such as fascism and collaboration with the Nazi regime, extermination programs of Roma and Sinti, the artist issued a public call to the citizens of Rohrbach to take part in a living memorial. As part of the complex process of coming to terms with the past, the participants collectively endured the hour-long homage to the victims of racist policies and ethnic cleansing by means of reenacting the scene from the documentary photography. In the second stage, Rohrbach Living Memorial transforms presence into a representation of living memory. In this second phase, the project takes the form of an installation using a light box with the Roma photo, a video documenting the performance, and a publication offered to the public for consultation, which includes interviews with the Sinti from Rohrbach and the participants in the action, as well as a letter written by the artists. In the different ways, both stages, or rather, both forms of artwork, the performance and the installation, create a monument of the murdered Roma, which was the fundamental aim of Iveković project. As the former, this is a monument living through the lives of the performance participants and deriving energy from the awakened thoughts and emotions. As the latter, the monument becomes a testament of a spiritual change and an archive of performative actions which transform a photo into the trace of Holocaust. Within the Rohrbach Living Memorial project, the essential role was attributed to the photo, whose relevance to the emerging artwork was meaningfully reworked by Sanja Iveković. That process of alteration constructed the project inner discourse, which unfolded a transition from a prosthetic memory to post-memory. The concept of post-memory was proposed by Marianne Hirsch to describe what has come to be referred to as inherited memory. That is memory of the descendants of the generation that went through a collective trauma. As such, this memory concerns the events which they have not experienced directly. Nonetheless, these events are so deeply ingrained in the consciousness of the following generations that they are felt to be their own. Post-memory is thus characteristic of the experience of people who grew up or are growing up in a world pervaded by narratives about the time from before their birth. The notion of post-memory designates, first of all, the experience of children of the Holocaust victims, but it also tends to be used in relation to other societies historically affected by collective trauma. The notion of prosthetic memory was developed by Celia Lurie. She links it closely to photography as a cultural source of memory. Photography, as Lurie sees it, inframes, freezes, and perpetuates its objects. Moreover, Lurie believes that the photographed objects are unshackled from the determination of the original environments and excluded from their proper context, a process she calls out-contextualization. Freedom from the context became a ubiquitous principle of the social world in which such experience prevail. The spatial-temporal dimensions of memory are dispersed, changeable, and impermanent. Memories are not only disjoint from space, but also disembodied. According to Lurie, photography makes both the subject and the object undergo indifferentiation, which abolishes traditional boundaries. In the process, other distinctions are also obliterated, such as cause, effect, inside, outside, volition, reflex, choice, coexistence. As conceptualized by Celia Lurie, photography is thus a prosthesis of the experience of seeing. Analogically, prosthetic are memory based on photographic seeing and identities founded on prosthetic memory. A photo ceases to be a trace of the event and becomes only an abstract reference to a displayed, uprooted object. The concept of prosthetic memory and photography as a prosthesis of seeing developed by Celia Lurie help to extend my argument onto experiences of those who are not subject of post-memory and for whom a trauma experience is located not in the space of symbolic experience and presence, but merely in the space of knowledge and thus of representation. Most citizens of Rohrbach would be such people. Determined by post-memory or prosthetic memory, a different framework of reference produces entirely different consequences, both for experiencing the photo and for those depicted in it. Ivekovich's project aims to make the photo of the murdered Roma a trace again, and to relocate it by the means of artistic action from the representational field into the field of presence. This trace is supposed to become a living source that found a new or a transmuted identity, a living monument as a living trace of presence, dwelling in the memory of the participants in the artistic event who took the symbolic role of victims. In this case, the artistic experience seeks to generate an imaginary as a recollection which is symbolically identified with the commemorated event. The collection of representations entrenched in the consciousness of the event's participants can be regarded as a kind of living archive, a collective monument. Subsequently, this monument as archive is rendered in a material form as a record of the presence and of the action undertook by the people who responded to the artist's invitation in the space of commemoration. In between the mental space of presence and its material record, in between the living monument as archive and its documentary materialization, there is a space of artistic identity project that initiates change. In this change, the prosthetic memory of the Roma tragedy can morph into post-memory, and a living remembrance of the annihilation can be inherited by the contemporary generations. To the present day, there are only a few monuments in the whole Europe which commemorate the Roma and Sinti Holocaust victims. In 2010, Sanja Ivekovic developed a similar project for the Gwangju Biennale in South Korea. On the Barricades, that's the title of this piece, commemorated the victims of the May 1980 uprising in a living monument. The biennial resource explained, on the barricades is a memorial enacted by volunteers who stand in place of statues representing the victims, humming a song that was a marching anthem during the uprising. Nearby, a slideshow of 545 photographic portraits collected from family members of the victims are presented on 10 monitors. Ivekovic has performed a small violation on the iconography of portraiture, closing their eyes to signal that the victims have found their final rest. The next example, the next artwork is the project Anti-Monument by Krzysztof Wodiczko. It's a long-lasting project. Krzysztof Wodiczko started working on his public space projections in 1980. From the very beginning, his projects have clearly belonged to the movement referred to as anti-monumentalism or counter-monumentalism. Within the movement, the presence of monuments in the public space is viewed as a way of ungrounded, unjustified subordination of the public space to power systems, their ideologies and historical narratives that they produce. In this framework, the presence of memorials in the public space undermines the public character. In his art, Wodiczko approaches the notion of the monument in an unusually comprehensive way. In his view, the essence of monumentalism is the power a given edifice represents and the ideology transmits rather than the commemorative function it fulfills. Given this, I believe that Wodiczko projections screened on such buildings as banks, courts, universities and embassies can also be construed and addressed as monument-related actions. For this reason, I include among his anti-monument such works as, for example, the Astor Building, New Museum projection of New York City 1984, which tackled the relationship between art institutions and the principles that organize the world around them, such as gentrification, exclusion, and depletion of human solidarity. Within the anti-monumentalism movement, Wodiczko has developed two basic action strategies and two forms of anti-monument. One of them can be depicted as a species of psychoanalysis of architecture or monument therapy. Inscribing the projected slides or videos in the context of a monumental building Wodiczko reveals the aspects disguised before by the dominant ideological message. In doing this, he deconstructs the official agenda and, so to speak, liberates the monument from the sick ideology imposed on it. For example, his Duke of York column projection, Waterloo Place, London, 1985, which contained images of crowds of miners run over by an armored vehicle, offered a critical alternative to the imperial symbolism and spectacular embellishing of urban spaces. Wodiczko's other strategy incorporates into the monument space a video developed by the artist, which is in itself an autonomous anti-monument. This anti-monument uses the physically existing monument not so much as an object of therapy, but rather as an opportunity to self-constitute in the public space. The monument as a projection screen, actually. This strategy is exemplified in Wodiczko's Bunker Hill Monument projection, Charleston, Boston, 1998, which turned the memorial of independent struggle into a memorial of struggle against violence. Importantly, as Dylan Trick aptly argues, I quote, when a monument loses its status as a monument, it becomes celebrated as an anti-monument, which then renders it a meta-monument. The end of quotations. This explains why Wodiczko's anti-monumental practices function as, in the same time, as subversive meta-monuments. Both strategies, that is, monument therapy and autonomous anti-monument, are characteristic of new media art in that they constitute themselves in an event, a performance, instead of in permanent inscriptions. The latter is now a property, practically speaking, only of traditional public space art forms, from the material memorial to graffiti. I will focus only on the strategy of autonomous anti-monument, and my selected examples epitomize the form of the collective anti-monument, developing through projections within the space of selected monuments as screens, and at the same time within the mental space of the participants. As such, the artworks I selected are anti-monuments in the shape of database. Anti-monuments as archives again. Wodiczko's work is largely community art. There are several reasons why I regard his collectively made works as the most valuable ones. Firstly, they aptly delineate the power relations established by the institution of art in relation to the community where the artwork is produced, positioning the artist, his team, and the community members as partners. Secondly, this practice helps to make the artwork provide an actual insight into the collectively and individually relevant problems of the community. In this way, the artwork addresses and tackles the real challenges the community faces. Thirdly, in this approach, the developing artwork can become a valuable anti-monument, for it is only a collective form that it can indeed represent the entire community. Fourthly and finally, this practice turns the artwork into a database, an archive that prevents it from the ultimate petrification and fosters its enduring presence as in the mental space of the community of the participants. The Bunker Hill Monument projection, which I have already mentioned, concerns the murders of especially young people from the nearby working neighborhood. Murders surrounded by a code of silence before. Faces of people talking about the loss of their loved ones, for example, of children and siblings, were projected on the top of the obelisk. Commemoration was meant first of all for them, for the victims of gang and police inaction. At the same time, however, it was a monument to the living ones who decided to speak for the dead and break the code of silence around their deaths. As such, it is a memorial both to the victims and to those who Wodyczko calls heroes fighting violence. The artist's video recorded them and helped them to master the courage to speak out, to speak up, show themselves, and simultaneously stand up for the local community. Their words became the texture of the event and added up to an archive of the voices of people who were resolved to question the status quo. The Bunker Hill Monument projection is an anti-monument that glorifies the basic social values such as solidarity, respect, compassion, care, acceptance, and tolerance. It acts against the prevailing anti-values, including aggression, contempt, violence, exclusion, and indifference, which have monuments erected to them all too often. In all his projects, Krzysztof Wodyczko speaks for the victims, for those marginalized, deprived of public visibility, and denied voice. This always often involves painstaking efforts to persuade such people to take part in the project and overcome their fear, distrust, and conviction that the project is pointless. This was the case with his Hiroshima projection, when it was only with enormous effort that he managed to get the offspring of Korean prisoners of war to speak together with the Japanese witness of the nuclear cataclysm. The point was that the prisoners died just like everybody else around, yet their death had been entirely shrouded in silence, never acknowledged, let alone commemorated. The projection, maybe I have.
I was born in 1943 in Warsaw, and I grew up on the ruins of the Second World War.
で、スマホを持ったから母親に聞きます。で、母親がダメだ。で、それはこの集団で連れているその人たちを見たおじさんがね、これダメだ。もう死体を持って帰ることはできない。
I could not stop thinking about those who were in the very bottom of that tragic situation.
いた魚がね、大きな魚、人間の体を食べてるんです。家でも卵がぶら下がったのがありました。寝ていらっしゃったら起きたり。彼は日本のことを勉強し始めてるんですけれども、引きこもりという言葉を彼は日本語で言っていました。日本人は引きこもってしまう性格がある。それは、日本の伝統である意味ではいいのかもしれないけれども、それに対する自分のさらけ出すということを今回のプロジェクションで強くやりたいと。
本当に嫌でしたよ。絶対に語りたくなかったし。
The projection on the City Hall Tower in Krakow in turn involved the victims of domestic violence, people with disabilities, gay people, drug addicts, HIV patients and the homeless. It also took considerable effort to compile an archive of voices, out of which the projection emerged and took its shape as an anti-monument. Its protagonists, the victim of exclusion, had to overcome their fear, shame, and hopelessness. The Tijuana projection, El Centro Cultural 2011, takes a special position in the context of the participants coming out. In this case, the obstacles on the way to staging the event, to collecting the voices that added up to the database, from which the projection protagonist's utterances could emerge were more formidable than usual. The reason was that the participants had to appear in person during the event, instead of having only been recorded beforehand. This was also both a technical challenge and a source of the project's particular value in the context of issues we are discussing here. Wodniczko's anti-monument came close to Sania Ivekovich's living monument. Yet their difference illuminates the basic distinctiveness of the two versions of monumentus of clay. The Croatian artist's work involved a reenactment, a repetition which is supposed to effect a transformation of the event participants who personify the victims of past violence. The idea is for the participants to undergo a spiritual change in this way and thereby to restore presence to the victims. In the Polish-born artist's work, the victims themselves appear to bear witness to their traumatic experiences by telling about sexual harassment at work, domestic violence, police brutality. Equipped with microphones, cameras, light sources, and immersed in the crowd, the victims staged the performance, adding spontaneous responses to the audience's reactions to the pre-recorded words. Documentation.
It's an order for many people who came from poor provinces who try to advance their life moving north. This building is a very important symbolic structure in Tijuana. It's almost like a symbol of the city, a landmark. So here we have the kind of wearable television studio with camera and lights and microphone to project the face with precision onto the facade. So the camera would be always in the same position in relation to human head, no matter where this person is looking. So the boundary between architecture and projected body will be blurred. The scheme of the building and the scheme of the person will be background and foreground at the same time, will be shifting focus. In Tijuana, 90% of labor are young women, girls. They work ways that we don't even imagine some of them. The issues that were brought were taboo, were issues of incest, rape.
The Tijuana projection only enhances the feature that differentiates the respective project of Ivakovich and Rodichko. The former helps the event participants to embody the dead victims in order to do something important for them and for themselves. The latter helps the victims to regain subjectivity, voice and the right to speak out in the public space, while inviting the witnesses of the event to take part in the ritual of liberation and transition to a new reality. What Sania Ivakovich and Krzysztof Rodichko have in common is the attention to suffering and dedication to erecting memorials to the victims rather than to the winners. Before concluding, let us return to Masaki Fujihata art and his already evoked project Voices of Aliveness, which inspired me to reflect on the theme of monuments, archive and memory in this talk.
This is an art project for making a collection of people's shouts. We designed a special video where people can join, and also we challenged to collect real space and digital space into a new format. Actually, we invite people to shout in the location at La Martinière, a public park along the river Loire in Nantes, in France. We set up a special circuit, pass for the bicycle, and the bicycle equipped with video plus GPS camera. And then people while riding on the bicycle shout, and this image and sound were recorded. After we captured data, we put these into the computer and processed to organize 3D data in a cyberspace. While we deliver each path made by each participant as a layer, we can make a tower shape or let's say tunnel shape we can make. This is not exist in the real space. We just see the data on the display, and of course we can share the image with other people. So this is not a conventional monument for keeping collective memory. A kind of physical monument or statue or building or bridge and so on. But this is rather symbolic image and also functioning like a place. Actually, it's a medium for generating memory. This is important. So this is the project to generate memory into a new form of monument. Saying this concept as a meta-monument with collective memory. Anyway, this is still ongoing project. We are now planning to do a second recording event in October at the same location. Please come and join us. Thank you.
Fujihata's idea to view Voices of Aliveness as meta-monuments opens up a new interpretive perspective that can be applied also to his earlier works. The project that particularly lends itself to such reading is the entire cycle of field works, on which Fujihata has worked since 1992. Each work of the cycle has followed the same development trajectory, constructing collective memories in cyberspace as a video archive indexed with GPS location data. This is what happened in the first work of the cycle titled Impressive Velocity, 92-94, as well as in all subsequent projects, including Alsace from 2002, landing home in Geneva in 2005, and Simultaneous Echoes 2009, to name just a few examples. These collective memories serve as databases to be repeatedly and endlessly explored in the process of experiencing the world. All these artworks as archives resulted from collective collaborations and represent the communities that took part in their making. At the same time, each of them is a site where individuals who make up a given community meet. The pieces are a space of both individual and collective creative practice. The works which in the consecutive iterations patently take the form of archive have not been approached as monuments either by the artist or by his interpreters yet. Perhaps some time needed to pass before the earlier project could reveal that, besides being archives, they are also memorials, sites which store remembrance and commemorate work, efforts and invention. Or perhaps it is just this particular piece, Voices of Aliveness, that has a feature none of the previous fieldworks has had, which confers on it the status of the monument. The cycle has not lost it before. If so, this property can be attributed to the earlier works only retrospectively. Voices of Aliveness is a collection of screams. Fujihata has noticed that people produce their first screams the moment they are born. Given this, the Voices of Aliveness project affords its participants the opportunity to be born again, where, unlike on the first occasion, they are agents and sources of themselves. Where does this agency come from? I leave this question unanswered, but I want to highlight that Voices of Aliveness is a highly specific monument. Its distinctiveness lies in that it is a memorial of the new birth of the individual and perhaps also of the community. That it has been erected by those whom it commemorates. It is bottom-up monument, which neither represents any power regime, not imposes a dominant ideology, neither glorifies violence nor marginalizes nobody. It is a monument as the eruption of joy. This is a monument which is a non-monument. This is probably the reason why Fujihata has called Voices of Aliveness a meta-monument. For it is less a monument and more a discourse on monuments and monumentalism which deconstructs causes, functions and consequences of the presence of monuments in our lives and our world. In our age, when states and communities conduct monuments battles and monument wars, such a discourse becomes deeply political. Masaki Fujihata's meta-monument, as I've said, is a manifestation of joy, of subversive joy, we could add. Sanias Ivekovic living memorials and Krzysztof Wodiczka anti-monuments are nowhere near joy. And yet, all the three projects are similar in the social status they share. For they are expressions of rebellion and side with the citizens. Irrespective of whether these works foreground historical politics and social consequences tracing the fates of the victims, as Ivekovic art does, or whether they address public space control, marginalization and rejection of the other, as Wodiczko's piece do, or whether they explore cyberspace and engage with bottom-up, grassroots practices of commemoration, as Fujihata's cycle does, they all have in common a drive to deconstruct power ideologies and to negate celebration and commemorations of power. The three artists are also similar in their investment in and commitment to the practices of constructing archives that promote art making, which eludes the oppression of subjugation. Arjuna Padurai has observed that archives which continue to develop and are accessible to activists help to shape locality not as a product of local tradition, but as an outcome of local work. And such practice helps to avoid the impact of both commodification practices and nationalizing narratives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are questions, please address your questions. I'll jump in and I would like to know. What precisely differentiates the two concepts of anti-monument and meta-monument? In my view, there is a certain point until where the two types of interventions, Fujihata and Wodiczko's interventions, are basically doing the same thing. That means, in a way, Sani Ivekovic as well, they are undermining the main history and then proposing something instead. Is not necessarily an alternative history, but a subjective history. Hence, given that, in my opinion, perhaps they follow more or less the same strategy, what makes the difference between anti-monument and meta-monument?
Wodiczko is widely recognized as one of the active representatives of counter-monumentalism. He worked with existing monuments. Within his actions, he wanted to transform monuments into another kind of presence in the public space. So we can talk about him as someone who is tending toward abolishing the idea of monuments. This kind of monuments we usually meet while walking the city. Masaki Fujihata is not interested in any kind of monument, except the one. He wants to memorize certain events, people who were involved in the project. Just want them to make the monument of themselves participating in the activity, and the monument that make them think about themselves, that can make, it is not, I didn't mention what they was shouting. You noticed that they had the piece of paper, not only camera and mic, but some of them at least a piece of paper. They have written their names, but in the Morse code. So they were shouted their own names while riding the bicycle. this is important because shouting its name is actually saying, here I am, I'm coming, I am getting back to reality again, but now more consciously than previously. Previously I was born, now I'm trying to born myself. So this is this kind of activity, and the work is kind of monument of this. But at the same time, Fujihata understands that it's difficult to combine this kind of monument to other existing monuments. So this is why he proposes the concept of meta-monument, that this is monument as the way of reflecting of monument, recreating its concept, starting again the idea how to memorize somebody or some event. And this is the point that let me understand that you say that they are both similar, because a counter
point
yes.
strategies is.
But when we come this way to meta-monument, you understand that every anti-monument is in certain sense also monument, because it is not only against the way of commemorating, but also propose the reflection on how to do it in a proper sense. So finally we can say that both terms are slightly influence each other, and we have actually to do with the field of reflection when monument, anti-monument, meta-monument comes together just to let us think about how to properly deal with what's going on, how to create presence as a serious variable bridge between past and future.
I would comment on Wodiczko's practice to say that it is definitely an anti-monument practice, but at the same time a monument itself is a sort of a blank spot in a city or somewhere. I mean, it commemorates something, but for people passing by daily, it becomes absent, effectively absent. And when projecting something on it, even if projecting a totally different discourse, perhaps in contradiction with the monument itself, is a way to put that monument back on the map and that location in a way.
But you know, it looks like they all three, they believe that the only working monument is the one we have in our consciousness. So this is why all three actually make kind of living monuments. Sanja Ibekovic named it this way because it was kind of performing the history. But all others, Wodiczko and Fujihata's, in a way they work also as kind of living monuments. That's more important what happened when you come there during the event. So this is just a participatory monument. You have to participate, you have to be on site, and only when you are there, the monument can appear in your experience and stay in your memory, in your consciousness. Can help you to rebuild your identity. So this participatory aspect, I think we should stress. So this is not just monuments as signs of dominance. Monuments as sign of participation. It's a community building process.
During the main events, as you mentioned, actually.
Because that's why I focused mostly on this kind of anti-monuments of Wodiczko, which actually demand the presence of participants. Participants actually become the substance of the monument in certain way.
Totally. Absolutely. Totally. Any questions? No?
But the monuments on which, so I'm also referring to Wodiczko here, the monuments that were chosen had a very strong, was there clear tension between the projection of the idea behind the projection and let's say the symbol with which the monument has been traditionally charged. So was it like a target, a response to something that official administration wanted to propagate as a message? They made this monument and they said, we raise this to the memory of what? And so was this kind of a negation of that message? I guess it was not an arbitrary choice, and the criterion were not just shape, size, and so on.
No, remember what I said, that Wodiczko started with this kind of monumentality. So in this series, it was extremely important which monument you attack, because the result of this intervention is the new meaning of the monument, which is in the process of use. And it can let us think that the second series, which we could recognize as actually not connected to any particular monuments, because they are all used just as screens. But I wouldn't say that, in spite of the fact that Wodiczko is presenting this way, I would say that there must be always the reason why you choose this screen, not the other. And you have to analyze anytime. This is not the general rule we can apply every time. This is just to analyze in each particular case. In this Bunker Hill monument, I think that it was just presenting two different ideas of how to call it, hero. We know all our national and transnational heroes. They won wars. They invented something important. Wodiczko's work shows the emerging of heroes as just everyday people with histories they live, with the losses they suffer. He is trying to say that our lives are full of this kind of events we could easily consider as worthy commemoration. That to building this kind of monuments we usually meet in the city spaces is just the way of shadowing the real important values that are around. Because of the monuments presenting kind of hierarchical vision of social life, and Wodiczko is trying to propose another perspective on this. But what exactly it could be, I think this is the result of the interpretation of each participant in each particular cases. And maybe there might appear that for different participants the idea backing the event might be different, but that's okay, because each one personalizes the experience, which is probably the most important. I don't know if I answered.
Yeah, I also have something related in mind, related also to what Claudia just mentioned. The lack of a monument in the case of Fujikata. So you said there is no monument upon which he works, but I found it curious that the setting is always a park. And somehow, I mean, one would take that as a sort of monument erected to what we may call a peaceful life, right? It's serenity and peace and so on. So in a sense, you could perhaps trace the presence of a monument upon which he works.
Maybe not this case.
Impressing
velocity.
But
this is
I was
climbing the Fuji mountain.
I was struck by the fact that the setting is always the background, and whether this background of silence can be taken as a kind of monument, usually endorsed as a symbol of serenity and good life and so on. And then there is this other kind of approach, the expression of joy, which is as well a manifestation of life.
I don't know. I would say that all this is characteristic for Voices of Aliveness, because I mentioned that impressing velocity is running in other direction. Same thing with Alsace. Alsace was made on the French-German border. This is about meeting, about passing the border, about creating this kind of international community. Landing home in Geneva is about languages and how we communicate. He mostly worked with translators. He especially was involved in dialogues with a special kind of translator, people who originally spoke Spanish, who translate from French into German, for example. So this is about building community. If there is something in common in all these projects, it is rather the process of building community. Sometimes the community is in the park, as you noticed, sometimes on the border, sometimes in the symbolic space of communication, sometimes in the effort to reach some point. But in all these activities, what was very important, Fujihata always involved a group of people. It was not him to produce images or sound. There were always people involved voluntarily in the project. He was the one who finally organized the data space. So community, yes, this is something in common within all this project. Nature, peace, quiet, not necessarily, I guess. But this is my interpretation.
Any more questions? Any other questions? Observations or whatever? Amazing. I'm sort of still hanging up in my mind the things you just mentioned before related to the fact that somehow, especially Wodiczko is turning the monument into event. That means turning a space, or a monument is a space, into something that develops necessarily in time. So it's this double articulation, space-time related to monuments. It's on the one hand turning them into events during the performance, but at the same time it's a sort of installing time and space, right? Calling memory in relation with a certain space. It's a way to operate a spatialization of history or a spatialization of memory, which I think is extremely important. I don't know. So I don't know if you see these double articulation space-time in that sense.
It is important. I mentioned at certain moments that it make Sania Bekovic and Wodiczko close to each other. The way they approach time and somehow neglect the space. Space becomes temporal. Time becomes eternal. With some exaggeration, I would say.
Exactly.
Just a short observation. When you discussed about Sonia Nevekovic work, the living memorial, I was thinking about this embodied memory, embodied monument, and we can actually read this transgression, this transference of message of the picture to the bodies through affective history. I mean, an affective history that actually releases the past from its arrest in the photograph to another discourse for the present.
to the living presence. You know, this is purely my interpretation. Sanja Ibekovic never referred to any of these theorists. For me, it was important that in both projects she dealt with images, with photographs. The first one, the second one also originated from photographs, actually, portraits. Just analyzing this, I exhibited this piece by Sanja Ibekovic actually in 2010. I curated the Biennale in Poznań and I invited her with this installation. But finally we didn't manage to talk more about this, so I was left with myself. And I thought that the phenomenon of post-memory is the driving tool in this case. With the concept of post-memory, you understand how you can recreate yourself, considering the past as a presence. Past can be part of your presence only when this past becomes the source of values organizing your approach to others, to life. And then I asked myself why we need it actually. What is the process of forgetting, of losing? Because prosthetic memory concept just tell us not only, it is all around photography, but this is also around how we approach the world, how we perceive, how we understand what's happening to us. And we can just recognize things and processes, or we can really see them. When you see it, you feel it. When you feel it, it becomes something which is vital for your perspective. When you recognize, that means that you're in this prosthetic way approach. Your memory, your identity is just prosthetic. When you see and feel, it becomes real in your life. So this is how I want to interpret these two works by Sanja Ibekovic. But obviously, like with interpretation, we can interpret things and processes in a different way. This one can let me understand and place the work. Because you know that during last documenta, Sanja Ibekovic produced a real monument, which is very interesting. So far I didn't get to any understanding of this transformation. She became kind of more political, because it was rather political statement, this monument. Luxembourg, her monument. It was rather a political statement. In case of living memorial and in Guangzhou installation, this is something more.
But she was political, always was very political, Sanja.
Yes, definitely.
I remember her famous performance during communist years, where she played naked in the balcony during. I
met Sanja Ibekovic in the late 80s, and since then we were. So I know it very well. Yes, but I agree, of course. But you know, sometimes you do something as political statement. Sometimes you do something which has also political impact.
Okay.
It's not the same. I think
it's not the same totally. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any more thoughts, observations, questions? No? Fine? Okay.
I think that I should
Yeah,
you.
okay. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.